Hi everyone, it's Nini. I'm reviewing Matthew Perry's book, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. Matthew battled addiction his entire life and lost his battle in October 2023 at the age of 54. He said, "When I die, I want helping others to be the first thing that's mentioned. Addiction is far too powerful for anyone to defeat alone. But together, one day at a time, we can beat it down." My goal is to help honor Matthew's desire to help others. I hope this helps another addict out there not feel so alone, or helps someone who has a loved one dealing with addiction have more insight into the disease. In Chapter 5, Matthew writes about his relationship with Julia Roberts. Friends wanted her to make a guest appearance on the episode that would air after the Super Bowl. One of the creators asked Matthew to send Julia flowers to try to woo her onto the show. He did this, and this started communication between them that occurred over fax machines, since this was before the internet and smartphones. They eventually had their first phone call, which lasted 5.5 hours. By the time Julia Roberts filmed her guest starring role, they were dating. Life was good. Matthew was on a top show. Friends was on People magazine, in Rolling Stone. He was being asked to appear on Letterman and Leno. He was getting movie offers, and now he was dating one of the most famous actresses in the world. After season 2 of Friends wrapped, Matthew went to Las Vegas to film the movie Fools Rush In with Salma Hayek. He would be paid $1 million for this movie. Matthew writes that it was actually easier for him to do dramatic acting rather than comedic, and notes that he received 4 Emmy nominations in his life, and only one of those was for comedy. While filming Fools Rush In, Matthew would often pitch jokes to the director and do little funny things, and the director told him, "You don't have to do that. You're interesting enough to watch without doing that." Matthew wondered, is he saying, "Maddie, you're enough"? The words I've been longing to hear my entire life? So life felt perfect to Matthew, but he writes that it was about to plummet into the gates of hell. One day while filming near the Hoover Dam, Matthew noticed people jet skiing and joined them. He ended up flying off the jet ski. He was in a lot of pain but still had to film the movie. A doctor came to him on set and gave him a pill and told him to take it when he was done filming. Matthew said he put the pill in his pocket and writes, "I swear to God, I think if I'd never taken it, none of the next 3 decades would have gone the way they did. Who knows? I just know it was really bad." Matthew finished filming, took the pill, and headed home. When the pill kicked in, he had a reaction similar to when he drank alcohol for the first time at age 14. He writes, "As the pill kicked in, something clicked in me, and it's been that click I've been chasing the rest of my life. I felt so good that if a locomotive hit me, I would simply turn to the engineer and say, 'It happens, brother.' I couldn't believe how good I felt. I was in complete and pure euphoria. The pill had replaced the blood in my body with warm honey. I was on top of the world. It was the greatest feeling I'd ever had. Nothing could ever go wrong." I was an active opioid addict for 4 years, and describing your body feeling like it was filled with warm honey is such a perfect way to describe it, because you do just feel that warmth come over you, and that is very, very addicting, especially when life around you is just jumbled and messy and scary and all kinds of negative feelings. Matthew said he called the doctor and told him the pill had worked for the pain, and the next day, 40 more pills were delivered to his house. Matthew writes that a year and a half later, he was taking 55 pills a day and had dropped to 128 pounds. He said he wasn't trying to die, he was just trying to feel better.
55 like in a day, which is where I was.
How did you get 55 a day?
Well, I had to wake up and realize that I needed to get 55 of them, or I was going to be really sick. So I did all sorts of things. I had a bunch of doctors, fake migraines and all that stuff. And
you take MRIs?
I did take MRIs.
Just to get the pills?
Yeah, there was nothing wrong with me.
Matthew ended his relationship with Julia Roberts, afraid she would be the one to end things with him first. And that seems to be the pattern with Matthew with his relationships. He has a very strong fear of abandonment, which is a very relatable fear. Matthew didn't feel like he was enough for Julia Roberts. He didn't feel like he was lovable. He writes, "Instead of facing the inevitable agony of losing her, I broke up with the beautiful and brilliant Julia Roberts." By season 3 of Friends, Matthew's Vicodin addiction had kicked in badly. He says you can tell by how skinny he is in that season due to his opioid use. Opioids interfered with his appetite, and it also caused him to vomit a lot. His weight varied from 225 pounds to 128 pounds during the 10 years on Friends. He mentions that the last episode of season 6 and the first episode of season 7 were supposed to have taken place on the same night, which is when Chandler proposed to Monica. But he had lost about 50 pounds during the summer break, so he looks quite different in season 7. He says you can always tell by his weight what addiction he was struggling with. Whenever he was heavier, it was alcohol. When he was skinnier, it was pills. He said when he had a goatee, it was lots of pills.
I didn't watch the show and haven't watched the show because I could go drinking, opiates, drinking, cocaine. Like I could tell season by season by how I looked. And that's why I don't want to watch it, because that's what I see. I weighed 155 pounds, on my way to 128 pounds. I feel too sorry for that guy. He's going through too much. And it's me. And I remember that. And I didn't understand what was going on. And I'm so grateful to not be that anymore. But it's hard to watch that.
By the end of season 3, his main focus was on how to get 55 Vicodin every day. And I can relate to that. You do get such a focus in your life that all you think about is how to get high or how to get drunk. Matthew had to take at least 55 Vicodin every day, otherwise he'd go into withdrawal. So he'd fake migraines, see doctors, find crooked nurses who'd hook him up. He was never high while filming Friends. He loved the cast members too much to do that. He had to step it up, but writes that addiction wakes up before you do, and it wants you alone. As soon as you raise your hand and say, I'm having a problem, alcohol sneers, you're going to say something about it? Fine. I'll go away for a while, but I'll be back. It never goes away for good. I feel that exact same way, and that's why I refer to myself as an opioid addict in recovery. I don't use the term former addict because I am always going to be an addict. And I actually had a conversation about this with a friend who's a doctor who was telling me that I am a former addict. He's like, that's in your past. That's behind you. You've moved on. But I'm like, no, I carry that with me every day. Even though at the time I'm recording this, I'm 5 years sober from opioids. It's always with you. And that's why you see people in meetings who have been sober for 20, 30 years, but they still go to meetings because we are always fighting our addiction. We are always fighting those urges to go to something that will make the pain temporarily go away, but would actually end up hurting us even more. Matthew filmed the movie Almost Heroes that starred Chris Farley. Both of them battled addiction. 2 weeks before the movie premiered, Chris Farley died from an overdose. Matthew says he punched a hole in Jennifer Aniston's dressing room when he found out. When he had to promote the movie they made together, he had to talk about Chris Farley's death from drugs and alcohol. Matthew says he was high that entire time. He said no one knew he was abusing opioids. He tried to quit here and there, but it would last a few days. He'd start to go into withdrawal, then go back to using. An ex-girlfriend called him one day and said she knew something was wrong with him. Matthew ended up confessing about his addiction to her. Matthew then went to the Hazelden Rehab in Minnesota. He figured that was close enough to Canada that he'd feel at home in the shitty weather. He was 26 years old and went through detox for the first time. He writes that he has gone through detox at least 65 times in his life. The headlines, Matthew Perry is in rehab, were a big news story. And that part is very sad because one thing that really aids people in becoming sober is the ability to be anonymous. There is a shit ton of shame that comes with being an addict. So it's vital for people to be able to heal and deal with that in privacy if they choose. But Matthew was not able to have that due to being famous. It was on the cover of every magazine that Matthew Perry was in rehab. I can't imagine how difficult that was for him. Dealing with trying to get sober is a challenge on its own, but then to do it and the whole world knows you are going through that. I can't imagine. Matthew went through rapid detox where they put you out for 2 to 3 days, and then when you wake up, it should be out of your system. But even after doing that, Matthew was still detoxing when he arrived in rehab, so he felt miserable. He had gone from 55 Vicodin a day to 0. That takes more than 2 to 3 days for your body to adjust. So Matthew was still detoxing, but the staff thought that he already detoxed due to the rapid detox, so they didn't really listen to him. One day in group therapy, he had a grand mal seizure, but during the seizure, he kept saying, I'm fine, because he was taught as a child to not rock the boat. He eventually got better, stopped pills, put some weight back on, played tennis. He completed 28 days in rehab and then went home. But he said he hadn't learned anything about what was wrong with him, why he turned to opioids. He hadn't learned about AA or how to be sober. All he had done was stop using Vicodin. Matthew said by the start of season 4, he looked the best he had ever looked on the show, but joked that he still wasn't good enough for Jennifer Aniston, who he was still crushing on. Matthew lasted 68 days and then had a drink, and said he drank every night until 2001. He writes about a theory about drinking, where he says, my theory being that drinking wasn't the thing that had almost killed me. It was opioids that almost killed me. Vodka had only ever filled the holes, and as the holes were still there, something had to fill them. I've had this mindset too. I've struggled off and on with alcohol abuse, and I think I justify it sometimes when I have drank and told myself, oh, it's not as bad as my opioid addiction, so it's okay to drink. I think I even said in a YouTube video when I was talking about the death of my dad and dog, I was heavily drinking vodka during that time to get through the pain, but I think I said something like, as long as I don't relapse on my opioid addiction, I'm okay. But it's not okay. My way of coping has been drinking, which I know is not healthy. It's weird to say that I'm drinking like a fish, but it can be worse. I don't think I'd be able to get sober a second time from it. So drinking is okay right now. Opioids are definitely at the top of my addiction totem pole, but just because alcohol is lower down the pole, I've learned that doesn't mean it's healthy for me. In 1999, Matthew fell in love with the woman he worked with on a movie, but she fell in love with someone else. He writes something very profound and says, when I can get someone, I have to leave them before they leave me, because I'm not enough and I'm about to be found out. But when someone I want doesn't choose me, that just proves I'm not enough and I've been found out. Heads they win, tails I lose. He never names who this actress was, but says she had told him his drinking was part of the reason she didn't want to be with him. He says that's another thing his addiction cost him. Matthew says you'd think that would make him stop drinking, but it actually made it worse. He'd light candles at home, drink, and watch the movie they were in together. He's very adamant he was never drunk or high on the set of Friends because he knew it was such a good show, and he really did try his hardest to not ruin it for the other cast members because he loved them so much. But he often did film scenes hungover. He said one scene in the coffee shop, he fell asleep on the couch. Matt LeBlanc nudged him and woke him up before it was time to say his line, so no one noticed.
I had a rule that I would never drink or do drugs while working because I had too much respect for the 5 people that I was working with. But I did work extremely hungover. At one point I was shaking so much, if I was going to go from the bookshelf to the table, I'd have to kind of quickly do it and put my hand on the table so I wouldn't shake.
Even though he was hungover, Matthew said he always showed up and always knew his lines. He didn't want to let the wonderful people he worked with down. When Matthew was 30, he spent the hiatus alone at home. He said he'd drink, watch a movie, pass out, wake up, drink, watch that same movie, pass out. Then one day he developed pain that felt like a knife sliding into his stomach. He called a sort of girlfriend, Jamie Tars, who was the executive that I think started the ball for him to get on Friends. But she came over and she brought him to the emergency room. Matthew had developed pancreatitis from what he described as drinking a ton of alcohol. Matthew spent about a month in the hospital, hooked up to IVs, not being able to eat or drink because that's the only way to heal pancreatitis. Jamie moved a bed into his hospital room and slept there every night with him. He often describes Jamie as an angel, and you can see that she was there for him for a lot in his life. Matthew says the hospital started giving him Dilaudid, and he said this was his new favorite drug. He said he'd be willing to stay in the hospital for 100 days if they kept giving it to him. He said he had Jamie by his side, and he was high and happy. During this time, he signed the contract for Friends for seasons 6 and 7, which would pay him $50 million. He said he signed that contract with a feeding tube in his arm and Dilaudid flowing through his brain. The medical staff caught on to how much Dilaudid Matthew was asking for, and when his pancreatitis healed, they said they were going to send him home without Dilaudid. His father offered to let him live with him when he got out of the hospital and suggested Matthew go to AA meetings and get his life straight. Matthew went to his house, packed some things, and then started to drive to his father's house. He encountered a van that was driving down the middle of the road, and Matthew swerved. He ended up driving into a house right into someone's living room. Thankfully, no one was home and got hurt. As Matthew waited for the cops to arrive, someone took a picture of him and his car smashed into someone's house and sold the pic to People magazine. Matthew lived at his dad's house, and a car would take him to and from the Friends set. Eventually, he started drinking again, and then he started taking Vicodin again. He was sneaking both the pills and alcohol into his father's house, and when his stepmother found out, his father told him he had to leave. The next season of Friends began filming, and Matthew was still using. He did try taking methadone to help. One day, Jennifer Aniston came to his dressing room and told him she knew he was drinking. Matthew had long since gotten over his crush on Jennifer at this point.
Imagine how scary a moment that was. And I said, how? I thought I was hiding it so well. And she said, we can smell it, we can smell it. But I wasn't in a position to stop. And that's what addiction is. But she was the one that reached out the most. I'm really grateful to her for that.
Matthew said being confronted by Jennifer Aniston was devastating. When she had said, we can smell it, the we part hit him like a sledgehammer. It sounds like people had been talking about him and would ask Matthew if he was all right, but no one wanted to do anything that would pause Friends because it was such a moneymaker. Matthew felt horrible and knew he was close to messing up a wonderful thing. He got a sober companion to be with him on the set. One day he took some medication and he had drunk the night before, and the combination kicked in during the run-through for a scene. Matthew thought he sounded fine, but he was slurring so bad nobody could understand him. He told people it was medication and he'd fix it and he was sorry. He didn't drink that night, but knew he was on thin ice. His manager told him, they're on to you. The cast, the writers, everybody knew. So Matthew asked his manager to get him on a movie to get him out of there. It was kind of like when he moved from Canada to LA as a teenager, hoping the move would improve his grades and bad behavior. He was hoping moving to a movie location would stop his drinking and pill taking. His manager got him a role on the movie Serene Sarah, which was filmed in Dallas. Matthew writes it was a bad movie, but it was made worse by how bad he was in it. He was filming that movie and Friends at the same time. When he'd be on the plane going back and forth between sets, he would drink vodka that he put in a water bottle. He was also taking methadone, Xanax, and cocaine at the same time, and drinking about a quart of vodka a day. This was obviously affecting him. He showed up one day on the Serving Sarah set to film a scene that they had already filmed a few days earlier. Jamie came to Dallas to help Matthew. She told him he was disappearing, and he didn't want that. He called his manager, he called his dad, he said he needed help. He needed to go to rehab. Friends postponed his scenes. The filming of Serving Sarah shut down for him, and Matthew said this cost him $650,000, but that was a small price to pay to save his life. He went to rehab in Marina del Rey. His first day there, they told him to go to his room, and he couldn't take any more drugs. Matthew said it felt like they were asking him to stop breathing.
It's progressive, so I'm going to make you drink more than you did last time. And you can't stop. I could not stop unless I was locked away somewhere. And at times, I would call drug dealers and have drugs brought in to the place I was locked up in because I was desperate and begging for drugs because the only way I had to feel better.
In this rehab is when he first read the Big Book of AA. 30 pages into it, he read a line that said, "These men were not drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control." Matthew closed the book and started crying. He wasn't alone. There was a whole group of people who felt the way he did. He would never be alone again. But he had to stop taking drugs and drinking every day, one day at a time, for the rest of his life. After completing 30 days at Marina del Rey, he was sent to another rehab because they felt he needed more treatment. Matthew writes he was in rehab when Chandler and Monica got married on May 17, 2001. He was also in rehab when he watched the 2001 Oscars when Julia Roberts won Best Actress. Matthew watched her kiss her then boyfriend and then make her speech, and he was very happy for her. But he realized the people in Hollywood were not his people. The people in rehab who watched him shake and be covered in blankets were his people. He was always grateful to have just one more day. He writes, when you are at the bottom, the days are long. He didn't need an Oscar. He just needed one more day. That's where I'll end the video for today. I hope you come back for my next video as I continue reviewing this book. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.